So this yard, was, as I mentioned, was always a place of great intrigue. What was the inspiration? Was it in Better Homes and Gardens? Was it in a movie? What, where did we see this? Where did this become what we wanted to look at? Because as I mentioned earlier, my grandfather would sit right here and stare into this yard for hours. So there was a lot going on in this image, and I always look at this image and think what kind of angles he was looking at for those different types of inspirations. So years later down the road, I'm traveling in France, and I go to the home of Monet in Giverny, just outside of Paris, because I've heard this name my entire life, and I need to go to the home, and I need to see it for myself and see what that inspiration was and why my grandfather had talked about this person forever. The second I stepped foot onto that property, I realized where this inspiration had come from. And I felt like a complete fool, to be honest with you, because if there's one thing that's going to happen, when you show up at my grandfather's house, it wasn't hugs and kisses, it wasn't that, it was an art book in your lap, a great, big, heavy art book. El Greco, Cézanne, Chagall, Monet. So growing up, I had all kinds of very big, very thick Monet books dropped in my lap. And my grandfather shared these images of the home, of the gardens, and all these beautiful things that Monet had done. And for me not to see that connection was just a little bit disappointing. However, on the other side of that, I felt like some sort of detective that had cracked the case, because what this told me was I was able to look through the world, through the natural world, and recognize where these inspirations within the work of my father and my grandfather had come from. And that was a very satisfying feeling. Every time I look at this painting, I think about that moment and then the connection, particularly how I have the connection now. I have to tell these stories, and that it is the origin or inspiration of what made these paintings go. Not just sharing paintings that my dad did or my grandfather, why they did those. So that makes the sharing of this painting and this particular image so incredibly important, because that was a lesson that my grandfather was teaching me forever. From a young child, images in front of my eyes, and for me to be able to recognize that again in the natural world was a really big thing. So, these lessons don't always come in the forms that you want them to, but for me to be able to recognize that is one of the most incredible parts about me sharing the Loper legacy with you. One other thing I want to note, and this is from my grandfather, who was master class on every level. I mean, an absolute master class with his teachings, with his inspiration, the way he handled himself as a professional, was that my grandfather didn't only adore the images of Monet, he actually loved his work and the man enough to take an inspiration and put it into his own life, to create a small idea like this in his own backyard. This screams Monet. And that to me is just an artist standing on the shoulders of other greats and creating your own path, and also infusing it into your lifestyle. So this painting really becomes a really, really beautiful thing that's not only an image that my grandfather captured, but it was something deep, very, very deep about that inspiration. And it makes me very happy to be able to share that story and that perspective from my eye. So I hope you enjoyed those details about our backyard and the lessons that it's taught to me.